Hey, this is Donnie from the Happy Lab, and I wanted to explain why it is that we strongly encourage students to seek external funding for their doctoral work. I'm going to try to give an accessible explanation of the funding structures in the department and program, and also kind of give a sense of what it is that the program needs to be sustainable. We kind of know from the college and university that each of our doctoral programs needs to carry about 4 students per year. The minimum number that the provost seems to look at is that programs should have on average 3, and we definitely want to be a little bit above that, just in case at any given point in time if we were a little bit low. And that has to do with the viability of the program. So what that means is if on average students needed 4 years of funding, then we would end up with 16 students, and current rate of funding is $12,000. And so the program's needs in terms of level of functioning, we'll just kind of round it. It's about $200,000 per year is about what it cost us in terms of doctoral funding. So how much does the program get from the department? Well, there's two main sources of funding from the department. One is when people are participating in teaching online courses, we get part of the fees from that directly back to the department, and that helps cover some of the cost. So I think for the entire departmental budget, it's kind of getting close to $200,000 across 3 doctoral programs. And then the college gives us some money. And so I think if we were to kind of look at our third of what we get from the college, I think it's about $30,000. And then there's another about $70,000 that's coming from online courses. Those are crude numbers, but it gives a general sense of what the needs are. So what that means is out of our 16 students, for our program to kind of break even, we need about half our students to be funded on non-departmental sources. So what happens if we don't get enough funding? Well, thankfully, this hasn't really happened in my 10 years here, but there were a few points, particularly when the college had stronger cuts, where we did have to come up with contingency plans of what we would do. And for a year or two, we could probably just reduce our class size. So there was one year where we actually did that. We were a little bit too expensive, and if we took in 4 students, we would be way over. We were kind of already at our limit, and so we reduced our numbers just for 1 year. So that's one option. The other option is if the grants help, but they're inconsistent. So it could be that if school psych and counselor ed are doing much, much better than counseling psych in terms of external funding, then they could kind of cover us. And the culture in our department has been that we try to help all 3 programs be viable, which means helping them on average accept about 4 students per year. So we could draw more from other programs if they happen to have surplus. And then the worst case scenario would be that we might have to accept students, most likely locally and probably with a prior master's, who wouldn't get funding from the department. So we could immediately tell them, hey, we don't have funding for you, but we have a position for you. And so in that case, we could accept students that we wouldn't have a commitment to fund them. And then their option would be to explore all over the university for ways of funding their position. And if they were able to find even a position that would fund them at $5,000 for the year, then they would be able to get tuition remission. So that would be really helpful. But so we've worked really, really hard as a faculty not to get to a point where we have to consider that option, because that would kind of create a different tier of funding, but below the departmental funding level. So traditionally, we've been able to kind of one way or the other cobble together, on average, at least 8 students who were funded on other sources. So one of the most common ways that we've done this is through our students being written into grants. And what's nice about grants is also often people can work on a grant that has some overlap with their research interest. So a lot of times that aligns with a student's career goals. Sometimes a student's own advisor will have grant funding. And so the research work and the GRA align well, and that can be something that helps someone kind of streamline their time commitments. The second source of funding that sometimes can help us with those 8 students per year that we need to fund on external sources would be fellowships. And so far there are 2 fellowships that most of our students have gotten. So one is a college level dean's fellowship, and that's something, the way that works is when you apply and once you have an offer, any of our students can apply for that. And the application involves turning in other parts of your application and then getting a letter from your mentor who offered you a position, and then also submitting your own personal statement, and there's a few other parts to that. So those processes are posted on the college website, and it also has the criteria posted. And if you look at the criteria, there's a broad range of things where you can kind of pick up a point here or there. So traditional academic criteria aren't weighted very heavily, and that's evolved a bit over time. Some of the departments who are more likely to have people who have been working in the field for a while and less likely to have publications and presentations, they advocated to kind of shift the criteria. And so it's a good idea to look really closely at those criteria because that's probably going to determine the candidates that are considered most strongly. And then what happens is there's a committee that kind of talks through things. If people have somewhat similar scores, they'll kind of talk amongst themselves and they end up presenting a ranking. That ranking is a recommendation, but the research dean and the dean are the ones who kind of make the final decision about those positions. And as I understand it, the primary purpose of those positions is to enhance the recruitment of the college. So the idea would be that if we're competing with someone who has an offer from another really strong program, say it was someone who's considering Maryland or Florida, all of those programs also have similar fellowships where they can offer someone higher pay. And so the dean created a mechanism where we could potentially recruit some of the candidates who are going to be highly recruited by some of our competing schools. So that's my understanding of the focus of the Dean's Fellowship. Another fellowship that one of our students got was an APA Minority Fellowship, and I'll probably have an interview. David Zelaya is the student who got that. I'll probably interview him and just kind of talk with him about his sense of the criteria for that award and also what was involved in the fellowship. It was not only funding, similar to the Dean's Fellowship, and funding is nice, and also protection of time. So the funding level of that was $27,000 per year, and then there's protection of your time to focus on training activities. So that's very nice. The APA Minority Fellowship has those features, but it also has some built-in networking features, and I think those are kind of built into even the process of the application. So I'll try to interview David and talk a little bit more about his process, and also what I'm going to try to do is get materials from anybody who's willing to share them, or I can kind of have their email and just, if you're interested in applying for one of these positions, it'd be a good idea to see if someone would be willing to share their materials with you. So the third thing that might be worth looking into would be just other opportunities at the college or even the departmental level. So, for example, Dr. Shannon House has several active grants, and we've had students who are funded on her grants. There are other people with kind of large grants at the college level, and a lot of times our students do really well looking for GRA opportunities because, a lot of times they're looking both at the master's and doctoral level, and our doctoral students are very strong. And so a lot of times if you put your vita in the hat for some of those opportunities, you would be strongly considered. So that's probably another avenue that's common. And then maybe a little bit less common, we've had some students, as they kind of get further along in the program, there are some additional opportunities for funding. A lot of times these aren't going to provide primary sources of funding, but they can supplement someone's funding. So for example, we've had some students who had kind of a paid assessment opportunity, and so in addition to kind of their practicum, they also arranged with the program for them to be able to do some assessments, but also get paid some for those assessments. The key there is just making sure that you talk with your advisor and the program coordinator. Any psychological work that you're doing while you're in the program needs to be aware of it. And then another thing that could be an opportunity as you kind of get in your third and fourth year is the department typically has some teaching needs. And sometimes they'll be hiring like PTIs, paid part-time instructors, to teach courses in the master's program. But if you were interested in kind of picking up one of those courses, a lot of times they'll pay similar to the rate of PTIs, and you can also get some advanced teaching experience. So the online courses, usually it's not a lot of interactive teaching. Those are just kind of plug and play courses where a lot of what you're doing is kind of helping guide people through the course. It's basically a lot of email. If you're looking at academic positions, you probably don't need, 3 or 4 courses that you've taught, but it would be a good idea to teach at least one in-person course just to get that experience and see if you like it and get the feedback and have the feedback available in your teaching portfolio that you'll submit when you're applying for jobs. And so that's an opportunity. And then once you've taught one of those courses, it can also be a little bit of a fallback. So say you end up deciding to slow down your program. A lot of times if you're in your 5th year, we're often able to help people find something, but a lot of times it is the best way for us to kind of help students match with funding, if it's from the department, is to help them match with some of the departmental needs related to teaching. So that covers a lot of the different opportunities for funding. And so what I'll probably do is interview a few people, and you'll get a sense of the mindset to have when you're applying for these applications. But in many cases where the criteria are related to academia, it's hard for committees to kind of evaluate other aspects of someone's work. So a lot of times the primary weight is going to fall on the kind of written statement and how kind of the strength of that writing. So it's important to kind of get good mentoring on kind of tailoring those statements, having strong letters, and then probably the biggest thing is the sooner that you can start to get on publications and get first authored publications, ideally in higher tier outlets. As you kind of get further along in the program, a lot of the fellowships end up prioritizing publication record.